Well, hello and welcome to H2 Tech Talk, the podcast series from H2 Tech. That's the new hydrogen technology journal from Gulf Energy Information. So I'm Adrienne Bloom, editor-in-chief of H2 Tech and your host for H2 Tech Talk. And this week we'll be talking with Cornelius Matthes, CEO of Dii Desert Energy, about the hydrogen strategy in the Middle East, and also what Dii's recently launched hydrogen advocacy organization, the MENA Hydrogen Alliance, is doing to further that strategy. So before we get started with the discussion, I'd like to remind you to share and subscribe to the H2 Tech Talk podcast for more expert discussions on technology and trends in the hydrogen sector. It's easy to subscribe. Just click the subscribe button on iTunes or Blueberry. So now I'll start by asking Mr. Matthes to tell us a bit about his role at Dii Desert Energy and the formation of the MENA Hydrogen Alliance.
Hello, Adrienne. Thank you, first of all, for having me. It's a true pleasure. And the topic hydrogen obviously has become quite hot, not only in the region, but globally. So I'm the CEO of Dii Desert Energy. We are a public-private sector network, or you can say a kind of think tank based out of the UAE, active in the region for almost 12 years now. And our core is obviously here, to boost the energy transition with Desert Tech 3.0. So it's all about green electrons and green molecules. And green molecules, indeed, hydrogen. And green hydrogen has, over the last few years, complemented our new vision. But I think it's important to point out that we look at the energy transition from a holistic point of view. So how the entire energy system can be moved, towards a more sustainable and emission-free energy system.
Fantastic. That's great. Thank you for that information. So we've been hearing about different hydrogen initiatives in various countries in the MENA region. And I know some are quite advanced, such as the green hydrogen projects that are planned for Saudi Arabia's Neom city. And then also there's a green hydrogen project planned in Abu Dhabi. I know in some other countries are just starting to take a serious look into hydrogen's potential. So can you share just kind of an overview of the major hydrogen initiatives that are happening in the region and how the MENA Hydrogen Alliance might be involved with any of those?
Sure, with pleasure, Adrienne. So looking back a few years from now, so renewables has become a huge success story over the last 10 years. Now there is, let's say, a huge capacity installed among the world's lowest prices. So this obviously makes green hydrogen possible. Now, on hydrogen, we've been working probably over the last 4 to 5 years on the topic hydrogen. And more recently, when 2 years ago we published the North Africa-Europe Hydrogen Manifesto, we saw a great deal of interest. So this brought us to launching the MENA Hydrogen Alliance, also thanks to my colleague Frank Wouters, who's chairing the DRI Advisory Board. And thanks to him and colleagues like Professor Ad van Wijk, we've really been spearheading on the hydrogen side. So, well, we obviously as the Alliance are here, first of all, to bring together people, to have a discussion platform, but then obviously, to work with public sector stakeholders, to advise, to show business cases from a technical, from an economical point of view, a little bit the bridge between Europe and the Middle East and North Africa, but also globally. And in terms of concrete projects, 2020 has truly been not only globally, but also in the region, really with massive announcements. One, you already mentioned the NEOM project in Saudi Arabia, a $5 billion green hydrogen and green ammonia project with approximately 4 gigawatts of joint solar and wind generation, with probably something like a 2 gigawatt electrolyzer capacity. So this is an advanced stage by some of our partners with Aqua Power and NEOM, and an additional, actually, an American company called Air Products, guaranteeing the offtake as well. And so this is hopefully getting to financial close this year, and it's been obviously a lighthouse project, not only regional, but globally. You rightly pointed out to the first pilot project in the UAE, which has been started 2 years ago at the Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum Solar Park in Dubai, which has around a gigawatt of solar PV operating, and the local utility DIVA, together with Siemens, kicked off this project, and it's more or less ready now. I understand it's in test commissioning, so this is obviously a lighthouse project, will be the first operational one. Just last week there were bold announcements in Abu Dhabi by Siemens and Mazda Mubadala on significant green hydrogen and also e-fuel plants in Abu Dhabi. So this is actually bold announcements with quite significant implications. And we've seen an announcement in Egypt very recently, also just at the start of this year. Again, our partner Siemens with the Minister of Energy in Egypt. And to point out that Morocco in North Africa is pretty advanced. So there has been a lot of planning on green hydrogen, green ammonia projects. And when the German hydrogen, the national hydrogen strategy was announced in June last year, that was actually the first project which was signed by the German government, funded by this 2 billion euro international cooperation facility of the German hydrogen strategy. So I think all of this is quite significant developments, all only very recently. So this can make us confident that these projects, will become more and more concrete, will of course be developed and built in a reasonable time frame, and with much more to be announced. Oman, maybe to close, also has a few projects, actually two announced, one more in the south in Duqm, and another one. So Oman also has keen plans to realize green hydrogen projects powered by solar and wind energy.
Yeah, so that's quite a few things. And what's the timeline for most of these, as far as when the startup might be seen?
Well, the Dubai project is obviously only a pilot project, but it's more or less up and running. The larger projects, so NEOM has a timeline to be fully operational by 2025. Which is quite ambitious. That's really a bold statement, for a project of such a size. Morocco is a 100 megawatt project, so this will likely be operational earlier, I would say. Oman, I think, didn't disclose timelines, but it's probably similar. That's something like NEOM in Saudi Arabia. There's probably more to come. So I would assume that, in 4 years from now, by 2025, we will have definitely a few gigawatts of green hydrogen projects operational here in the region.
That's really interesting. So lots of really good early efforts. So, what advantages do you think that the kind of looking further down the line, when some of these, these pilot and demo projects, and then some of the ones that are larger scale, are more established, what advantages do you think that the MENA region has as a hydrogen producer and supplier or exporter, especially with the renewable energy costs, particularly for solar and wind being among the lowest in the world? Do you think that MENA green hydrogen production could be competitive with low-priced hydrogen projects in Europe?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, more realistically, probably outcompete, even including transport costs in Europe. And, it is a declared objective, obviously, to Europe, being a primary energy importer, having been so for decades, importing today 80% of primary energy, to want to import green electrons and green molecules. So this is an integral part of the European hydrogen strategy, which was published in July last year. And together with Hydrogen Europe, we could contribute with the 2 times 40 gigawatt electrolyzer initiative in this respect. Now, here the region, as you rightly point out, has amazing wind and solar conditions, among the lowest cost in the world. So to give you a flavor, we are last year's cost $1.35 per kilowatt hour, the latest tender in Abu Dhabi. we are below 2 cents of the 2019 wind tender in Saudi Arabia. So it is reasonable to assume that in a year from now, we'll hit sub 1 cent per kilowatt hour for solar in countries like UAE or Saudi. And wind is also, fast going below 2 cents. So this alone, also given the amazing combined solar and wind sites where you achieve high capacity factors, which are crucial to have as many long full load hours for the electrolysers as possible. This is one very important ingredient. The second ingredient is, I would say, the existing infrastructure and the nature of the business. If you look at GCC, for example, GCC has obviously been among the leading world's oil and gas exporters. So there are potentially a lot of synergies, both on the infrastructure side, but also on the client side, to step by step complement and of course replace as less and less oil and gas will be needed over the next decades, and become, let's say, a hydrogen exporter. And, I said in a podcast last year that green hydrogen has truly the potential to be the new green oil. And we definitely believe in this. And, the proximity to Europe as well is an important point. There's even existing gas pipelines from North Africa to Europe, which could be potentially converted to full hydrogen pipelines. So I think it's just a few factors, and obviously, the close ties to Europe. So I think all of this gives the region here quite a competitive edge in becoming a global powerhouse, for green electrons and green molecules long term, which is exactly our mission, which we call Desert Tech 3.0.
Oh yeah, definitely. And that kind of leads me into another question I had for you. So speaking of the client side, so what pathways is the MENA Hydrogen Alliance opening up for eventual hydrogen trade between the MENA region and Europe? And how are the EU's new policies on hydrogen aiding these efforts?
That's a good question. So obviously, as of today, there is no market existing for green molecules. And, hydrogen is mainly produced captive, is not really transported. A smaller percentage, approximately 20% of ammonia is shipped globally. But, it's mainly a captive market. So for now, the first objective is to jointly create a market. And obviously, this is both on the supply and the demand side. We feel that, Europe with the Green Deal was a very bold plan in decarbonizing Europe as a complete continent, as a first continent by 2050. And the hydrogen strategy has really huge numbers, with more than $500 billion potentially deployed for hydrogen over the next decades. So this is quite bold. So, and the pressure to decarbonize, particularly, energy heavy industries such as steel, chemicals, but then on the mobility side, on, of course, heating and cooling. So there's many applications, and this pressure will obviously create significant demand. And we already feel this, that potential off-takers, they are starting, to gauge potential producers, suppliers of green hydrogen and green molecules in the region. And and then, of course, with the big plans, the national hydrogen strategies, the big objectives, they were declared last year, which is very important. It's quite bold objectives, but now the execution roadmap and the regulatory framework is indeed the next necessary step. And with Hydrogen Europe, of course, we are happy to continue to support, like we did for the 2x 40 gigawatt initiative on this regulatory roadmap. My colleague Frank is actually working on this. And so that's an important point. And step by step, I think we can jointly work on getting all the prerequisites right to create a market. Obviously, apart from regulatory regimes and a clear environment in this respect to be able to plan, there is topics like certifying, the green origin of hydrogen. There is standardizations also from a technical point of view. There is the question, how green hydrogen will be treated vis-a-vis other colors of hydrogen. There's many open points, but we are very excited, and we feel it could be a relatively swift development now over the next 2 years to work out all of these points to come hopefully to a fast development. And the transport options, transport of green hydrogen and green molecules obviously is a massive challenge. There are different options. None is ideal as of now, but that's also another field we are working on, and trying to identify the best possibility, the most economic and suitable transport options, for different applications and use cases.
Yeah, well, there's certainly a lot of initiative and momentum from many different corners of the industry and other reaches as well. So I think that I think we're going to see a lot of that momentum continue over the next 2 years. And so I think you're right. But kind of continuing on to the idea of application. So based on your research and the initiatives that you're seeing now, which domestic sectors in the MENA region do you think hold the most promise for eventual hydrogen application from both a technical and a demand point of view?
That's an interesting one. In Europe, it's probably slightly different. So, of course, the focus should be to green, to defossilize the energy systems in MENA before even thinking about export. It will be probably a bit of a parallel development, realistically speaking, which is also okay. But the domestic use cases, they vary from country to country. So if you look at a country like Morocco today is importing around 2 million tons of ammonia every year, which is equivalent to $500 million. And Morocco importing more than 90% of primary energy resources could, of course, well green these dirty ammonia imports, which is alone probably something like a 6 gigawatt opportunity. So these are the low-hanging fruits, and this will, of course, come as economics. They're not far from a business case. Where in a few years from now, we expect actually green hydrogen, to become competitive with, conventional or low carbon hydrogen. So this is quite an interesting one, and of course will potentially have geopolitical implications in a way that, the big energy importers in the past might be even energy exporters in the future. Now, for countries like the UAE and Saudi Arabia, obviously the use cases, they're different. So one low-hanging fruit, I would say, is on the mobility side, something like fuel cell buses, which in countries like NEOM could be an interesting one, or in the UAE, where you need long ranges, and where also electrifications with batteries is somewhat challenging due to high temperatures. But this could be an interesting use case, on fuel cell mobility, starting with buses, for example, but maybe some other, forms of transport, and then eventually probably in a later wave, fuel cell electric vehicles. Range extenders even for cars could be interesting. Then obviously things like boats on ports. There's different applications where hydrogen might play a role. Steel is another possibility, to substitute coking coal in a direct reduction process where the global steel industry actually heads to. And this is also important to remain competitive, because in Europe, obviously, there will be a carbon border tax. So steel imported from the region here to Europe will be penalized. So there is also an implicit incentive, to reduce the CO2 footprint for the industry here, and as well as chemicals, for example. The region obviously has substantial chemical industries, and I think, again, there is a natural incentive, to step by step, defossilize and in such a way, significantly reduce the carbon footprint. Other applications, probably a little bit more longer off, power generation by hydrogen. or for example, cooling, more than heating in Europe, but cooling is obviously here in summer relevant. So, there might be a role in this. And also, by the way, there's a huge seasonal challenge. While Europe has a higher energy requirement in winter due to heating, the GCC has a much higher energy requirement in summer due to cooling. Up to 70% of electricity load in summer is cooling, which is, it's just mind-blowing. And obviously, there's a huge efficiency potential, but also to store seasonally and, to store, for example, in underground rock formations, something like salt caverns, and bridge seasonal demand and supply gaps. This might be a really interesting perspective here for the energy system.
Definitely. So it sounds like there's definitely a lot of potential for hydrogen growth in the region, and not only for use in the region, but then also as an industry, and for excuse me, the MENA region to be a supplier. So sounds like a lot of promise, and it sounds like what you're doing with DII and MENA Hydrogen Alliance and Desert Tech is going to really help further those efforts. So really appreciate you sharing your views with us on H2 Tech Talk today, Cornelius, and appreciate you being our guest. And thank you very much for your time, and hope everybody enjoyed this episode of H2 Tech Talk, and we'll talk to you again next week. Thanks again, Cornelius.
Thanks again, everyone. Really appreciate it.